books that I recommend are by authors that I'm about to talk to. First up is Carrie S. Allen, author of Michigan versus the Boys. Hi, Carrie.
Hi.
All right, so Michigan versus the Boys is about a girl named Michigan. And is it your debut book?
It is, yes.
Congratulations. So I
Thank
can't wait
you.
to talk more about it.
Thank
And
you.
joining us is Jeff Herbach, the author of Cracking the Bell, which is on this year's list. Look at that book. There it is. So I can't wait to talk about these books with you guys. But first things first, we were talking when we joined the chat about what we like to do like in the snow. What do you guys do like on a snow day? Do you guys enjoy snow days, or as a kid, did you have a particularly favorite activity?
So we started off our morning at about -6 degrees here in Colorado. So nice and cozy warm.
Right.
And the first thing we did this morning, I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, was we boiled water and put food dye in it and went out in the -6 degree weather and threw it up in the air and made mist. So I highly recommend it. It's very fun. The dogs enjoyed it too, because they got to go chasing the little water droplets everywhere. So yeah, that's how we started our morning, our second snow day in a row this morning.
Did the color like land in the snow, and did it stay there, or did
That
it
was a
kind
bit
of
of an experiment, and you couldn't see the color in the sky, but now it looks like when we get down to the grass again, maybe the grass will get dyed green. Maybe it was helpful.
We'll find out in a few
Yeah.
weeks, maybe. All right, cool. Jeff, what about you? Do you have a favorite snow day activity?
Not really. I I have a really big snowblower. It's like a 3-stage, this like giant snowblower, and I do love snowblowing. I really love snowblowing. But yeah, I've had kind of enough. I feel like I'm in my early 50s and I've been in Wisconsin and Minnesota pretty much my whole life, and I just don't like it. I don't want to go. I don't want to go outside. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well,
Arizona sounds good. I know that's where you're from.
no, I hope that you stay warm and cozy then. I want to jump in and talk about the books, and both of these are sports fiction. Tell us a little bit about what made you choose to write specifically like sports fiction. Carrie, your book is about hockey. Jeff, your book is about football. Why did you choose those sports? Jeff, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, I've written, a number of books with sports, either kind of in the foreground or in the background of the stories. And I came to write this book because, football's dangerous. Well, hockey's real dangerous too. And there are awful things that can happen to people who play it. And so, I kind of thought about my own experience, where football organized my life when I was a kid. I was a mess. I was jumpy. I was in trouble all the time in school, until football. And sort of the sport made sense to me as a jumpy kid. I started sort of working towards a goal for the first time, because of football. And I kind of think I wouldn't be okay if it weren't for football. So I wanted to write the story of a kid who has suffered concussions, but was also he has worse problems than I had as a kid. And kind of play out a thought experiment, like what would you choose to do if you were on a third concussion and knew what they know now about concussions. And he had to make some kind of hard choices because to him football was life. And anything good in his life was sort of coming from it. But if that meant dementia or like significant brain trauma that was long lasting, could he really continue? So that's why I wanted to write the book. And it turned out to be a little darker than a lot of my other stuff.
I think darker is not necessarily always a bad thing. I think it was really like an in-depth, very realistic. Like my heart kind of like felt for Isaiah as I was reading that book. And then in contrast, like Michigan in Michigan versus the Boys, Carrie, she's also very passionate about her sport. What made you want to tell her story and write about hockey?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because both characters are so passionate about their sports, but have to go through struggles with them. I was working in sports medicine before kids, before BC, before children. And so it was only when I left sports medicine, which is like an 80-hour-a-week type of a job, that I actually had time to get back into writing again. And I really missed all of my athletes. And I was even having a hard time playing hockey too, because of just, the changing in my lifestyle and my schedule demands and everything else. And so that was kind of my way to start to keep connected with these things that I was missing out of my previous life. And my first sports manuscript was about a girl who plays on a boys team and has this great like family kind of an atmosphere. And she actually has a hard time transitioning to girls hockey when she gets higher up in level, which is a very common thing. And I loved it. I had so much fun writing this book, but the minute I was done, it was like, I only told the easy part of the story. Like that was fun and it was easy. And there's the hard side that also really needs to come to light. And so that's when I sat down and wrote Michigan, because there are Michigans, there are real life Michigans out there. And I wanted all of you guys to be able to have that support. So that is where Michigan came from.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both for writing such like relatable protagonists, because as a public educator, I see Isaiah's and I see Michigan's. And it sounds like you both have had experience playing the sports that you're writing about. Which has more pressure, being on the field or on the ice, or off the ice or off the field? Like, or is it an equal balance of both?
That's a good
Whoever
question.
wants to go first with that one.
I felt really good on the field. I think, I guess looking back, there were pressure moments that either went well or, I blew, that I think I thought about afterwards more. But while they were happening, I didn't really feel pressure while they were happening. I really felt the joy part of sport growing up.
And from what you said earlier, it seems like the routine really like the structure of the sport, like there's rules to the game, there's conditioning and practicing. Yeah. So it fit like a glove.
Yep. So I find life now much more filled with pressure. My kids are now in college though. So Carrie, I think you have much more pressure than I do.
Yes. I have to feed them on a very regular basis. Otherwise, major pressure.
Feed and water them. They're like complicated houseplants.
I think for me, it's more striking that balance and exploring that identity of who you are as a person. And I find this so much with the athletes that I write, is that it's really a part of who they are. And so they're always that identity. They're always that athlete identity in everything that they do throughout the day. So I think there's still that pressure when they're not on the ice too. But it's an interesting side note that being Michigan, or being a girl like Michigan, when we talk on the ice or off the ice, from the minute she walks into that rink, the pressure is on.
Mhm.
And it is never going to leave her. She's got eyes on her at every minute. She's in a fishbowl at every minute. And so it's funny because when she steps on the ice, that's probably the only minute that she actually feels safe and herself and able to just do what she loves and focus on what she loves.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think regardless if you play a sport or if you're an athlete, whenever your passion is, like I think when you find that moment, you really get to find like your comfort zone and the routine and like your safe space to, do what you do best or do what you love best. So I think that's like a very important thing. But then sometimes when you leave the comfort zone, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I think it's great. There's this big misconception about student athletes, I think, that they're only obsessed with their sport. Did you feel like you had to like address that? Do you feel like that misconception even sort of exists? Or like, how did you like adapt that into your writing?
Well, I think for me, and I love that you use the word student athlete. I find that really important, really important. But part of what I would really like to see publishing do more of is to address, and in real world too, is to address every aspect of athleticism. It's great if you are just going down to the skate park. Like you can be an athlete who just hangs out at the skate park and skates, that, or on the slopes. I grew up in a ski town. You're still an athlete, even if you're not wearing a varsity jacket and, going to practice from 3:30 to 5:30 every night. And so I would love to see more of that representation just all across the board, because I think if we can get that in publishing, then it makes it more common outside of it as well. And I don't think we all need to be serious varsity athletes or nothing. I'd love to see more of a spectrum there. So I tend to write that a lot in different things that I write. In Michigan, it was very important, obviously, to the plot that she be simply a varsity athlete in this story. But boy, would I love to see more of a spectrum show up on the shelves. That would be great.
I had made a note of this because one of my students had asked me, and it just came through Q&A. Quick premise of your books, especially I have students who are joining and they haven't read your books yet. They wanted to learn more. Michigan's story. She, her high school girls hockey team loses funding and is no longer able to. Can you walk us through the plot really quickly?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
So as we all know, budget cuts happen and they're not pretty when they do. And Michigan's hockey team is cut, along with boys swimming, which is also a commonly cut sport, because of course there's Title IX regulations that come into play with participation and money involvement. So these two teams are cut and she has nowhere else to play. She lives in a really small town. There's not as is very common for girls hockey, there is not a local club kind of a situation for her as well. So there is one hockey team left in town and she really wants to play. And her her teammates are all finding these other things to do with their lives now. And she's not ready for that. She doesn't want this forced retirement. And so she goes out for the boys team and finds out just how toxic that environment can be. There's a lot of boys there that are not happy with her being on their team. And she ends up kind of thriving in that atmosphere and she's playing really well. She's being challenged on the ice and physically. Her game is getting better every game. But she's going up against a lot of bullying and hazing, which turns really ugly into assault at one point. So, yeah.
Yeah, that the story, there were points where you're rooting for Michigan so much, but then at the same time I'm like, Michigan, I would have not been going through, like I would have thrown in the towel sooner than you. And then Jeff, cracking the bell, Isaiah reminds me of a student I had many years ago who he was playing football, got a concussion and made the tough decision to actually quit the sport. I just remember that kid's the day after he made the decision and how heartbroken he was. But is now doing great things with his life. And it's hard to imagine it differently. But can you walk us through Isaiah's story?
Yeah. So Isaiah is a smaller player. So he's a defensive player, and a big hitter. He likes contact. And it is, he's been sort of the black sheep of his family his whole life. And everything falls apart when his sister dies in a car accident, and his family breaks apart. And he's forced by his father. He kind of makes a choice, either go to a group home or play football. And so he plays, and it's great. And it gets him friends, and it organizes his life, and he becomes sort of emotionally healthier. But he's got a tendency to drop his head and get these concussions. And when the third one happens, a doctor tells him that, this could be serious, and this could have long-term implications. His parents are trying to force him to quit, but he's about to turn 18. And so he can make some of the decision by himself. And yeah, luckily he's got a hippie friend who likes to paint houses that he hangs out with, and they kind of talk through life, and he figures out, that the things that he's built from football are actually foundations for all sorts of other things. And it is kind of a philosophical journey he takes during the book, and I guess his pal makes a lot of good jokes. So, yeah.
And he has a scholarship weighing on him as well, doesn't he?
Yeah. It's from an Ivy League school. He's a great student, so it's not an athletic scholarship, but the way the Ivies do it is you get a academic scholarship for playing sports. Yeah.
Funny how that works out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both for kind of giving the premise of your books. And it's interesting, we're talking about student athletes, and we just poked fun at academic athletic scholarships. How did you try to incorporate the balance of athletics and academics in your stories with your characters? And since they are YA fiction, and I feel like both of these books could have easily been adult fiction, because as an adult, I felt like I could relate to both these characters. So talk to me a little bit about the balance of academics and athletics, especially in the life of a teenager, because that can be rough.
Yeah, I can go first. You might have more to say about this, Carrie. I feel like I'm getting so far away at this point from the balance of academics and athletics, and now my kids are gone. I mean, it's really important to me in everything that I write for teenagers, that I get that I have the sort of round world that they live in, and that they have bodies, and that they feel sort of the emotional pain and physical pain of growing up, and part of that is the pressure that school puts on you, and so the balance that Isaiah has, and he's different than other characters that I've written, is actually that sports puts him in balance. It gives him a schedule. It allows him to focus, and so he's actually become a much better student, and that certainly happens to kids. That's one thing organizes their life, and then everything else sort of falls into place around that organization. And so he's actually concerned about pulling up that anchor and having everything else fall apart, including school, because he will be once again at loose ends and angry and not sure what to do with that energy. Yeah.
Carrie?
Yeah, this was something Michigan struggles with. It's a point of contention between her and her mom in the book, is that it is, and man, hockey is the worst at it too, because you're reliant on ice times and when the ice is free, and the bigger kids get the later ice times or the earlier in the morning ice times, so you got to be up late. kids in hockey, man, that's a tough season, and balancing the schoolwork with it. Michigan really struggled with that. And that was important to me to show that that is difficult as well. And I think what really took the hit for Michigan in the story was that she kind of used that as an excuse to pull away from her friends a little bit too, who were also off doing their own things. They've got free time now because they don't have their hockey team anymore, or they're playing for a different team somewhere else, in a different town. And so that's kind of where you have to make those decisions. You might not be available to be friends for 4 months because your time is owned by whatever they schedule they give you. And the travel as well can really start to weigh on a kid. So it is difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, and something's going to have to give. And yeah, she's going to have to catch up a little bit after the season. That's for sure.
I feel like, oh man, kid schedules. And we both have kids, so I think you guys know it's like, oh man, kids take a large part of life and like their schedules and everything. For writing sports fiction, what sort of like research, you both are familiar with your sports, but did you have to do any additional research beyond, you mentioned like ice times. I'm assuming that's something that you knew based on your experience with hockey, but was there anything else that you had to research in order to put it into the book?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had Carrie's background, because I had to research concussions. That, I didn't actually know a lot about what happened. I just knew that I had them, when I played football. I remember how they felt. But I didn't know sort of the implications. So I had to research some of the medical stuff behind it. But the more interesting research that I did was how many kids, for instance, are killed because of head injuries playing sports in a year versus how many are killed in car accidents. And some of the balancing that he's trying to do is like, isn't life just super dangerous? Wouldn't we be better off actually not giving teenagers driver's licenses? Shouldn't that be a conversation rather than you shouldn't play football? Some of that kind of like statistical research was really fun, and actually caused me to do a lot of thinking about how dangerous it is just to walk around on this planet. Maybe you're safer in a football field.
I'm now
sorry, I didn't mean to scare you there.
Now I'm thinking of like every move from now the rest of my day. I'm like, do I go outside?
I'd say no. If there's ice out there, you're in trouble.
Right, Carrie?
Yeah. Well, and the hard part with Jeff's research is that we still don't know very much about concussions. We're still trying to figure it out. So,
right.
Research for me was, I did not play hockey growing up, but I grew up on a frozen pond skating, and have been, I've worked every position you can work at an ice rink. I was a Zamboni driver in college and grad school, and worked on the bench as sports medicine in high school setting for hockey. And I've been a USA hockey referee, and I've done a little bit of coaching for more novice hockey. So I had the hockey part down. I kept a copy of the rule book, the USA hockey rule book, next to me, just in case I needed to check something, or for a lot of those random things. My copy editors hated me probably because they were like face off, hyphen, no hyphen. And I was like, well, the USA hockey rule book says, and they're like, yeah, well, because hockey players are great at grammar. So, yeah. But I think the hardest thing for me to research was that I grew up in Colorado, and that hockey is a little bit different everywhere you go throughout the country. And I, luckily, the location of the book up in the UP was inspired by one of my best friends from college who grew up in Houghton, Michigan. So I was like texting her random things like, what what kind of beer do you think the dad would be drinking in this scene? And like, what's the best ice cream up there? And all these random things. And so she was really helpful with that as well.
Don't you just love friends like that? You're just like, hey, I have a random question. That's great. What was probably the most difficult thing to write in your book? You mentioned a little bit about like the things you had to research. And I've kind of talked about like my reactions, like some of the tough stuff to read. But what was your like the most challenging part to write, Carrie?
Yeah, if you've read Michigan, you can probably guess.
Yeah.
There's a couple of scenes in there that, they say you got to torture your characters. Mm-hmm. And I did. Those were the kind of scenes that you race through and you write it and you barely have to edit anything because it comes out really passionate and well, but then you need to like sleep for 3 days, so those were easy to put the words on the page during a couple of the more tense scenes. But they emotionally wreck you, and you have to tell yourself as you're writing this, that there are things that need to change in this sport that I love, and that this is way too realistic. And that's your motivation to get in there and make that scene happen, even though it hurts.
Right. I think, and thank you for not actually saying what any of them are. Some of them I think are very triggering for anybody who has had to deal with assault or hazing or bullying. There are many moments that I think, why didn't she just go straight to the police? And she even questions that in the book. And then, they're tough to read. And I imagine that if I was writing them, I'd be like, get this away from me. I've got to take a break, go watch something fluffy on Netflix to detox my brain. But
that was one of the most important things that I wanted to do with this book, is to point out why Michigan couldn't just get up and walk away, and couldn't just quit, or, she had no ability to find her way out of it on her own. And I think that was really important for me. That was one of the most important themes for me to put out there, because again, there's so many realistic things that are happening, even if it's the earlier, smaller things that are happening. That's when you need to start looking for the helpers and the way out and everything. And that people around us as well. If you're a parent at the rink, if you're a teammate, you need to be the one who looks and says, Michigan cannot go to find help. There is no help for her right now. I need to be the one to do that. So
right. Yeah. And I think even and it was interesting, she finds like somebody pours Gatorade on her stuff. That's an example I feel like I could use, because I was reading in another book how somebody dumped Jell-O on somebody else. And I think this is usually a comic tactic in like comedy films. Okay, it's a food fight, but like you throw food at somebody else. And I feel like that's the start of bullying. And I think that's something, if you take anything away from this panel today, nip it in the bud early, and be that voice to stand up for people, but like, that's not cool. Jeff, let's talk about Isaiah. What was the hardest thing to write in Cracking the Bell?
Weird that the like most painful thing to write was him imagining how his sister might not have died at the moment that she did.
He went straight for the feels, man.
Yeah. and that was, how haphazard a crash at an intersection is, out in the country where there's no traffic, and yet it happens. And, sort of imagining reeling back 10 minutes or an hour, and what if one thing had gotten in the way of those two cars not, coming across? What if something was different in the pickup driver's life? And that was mean, this is, and when you have kids and you start, again, this was a book that made me feel like the world was very dangerous. And, imagining wanting to keep my kids like in the house because of, well, if you leave right now, you could be setting yourself off in 6 hours to get kit in the country someplace.
Right.
So yeah, it was hard to, just repeatedly write that and try to get it right and try to get his feeling about that right. And that's sort of at the heart of the book. There's so much that we can't control in the world.
Yeah. I think both of your books do a really good job talking about exactly what you said, the things that we can control. Sure, if I don't play football, but if I had the right form and maybe wasn't like incorrect form, I might not get a concussion, but I can't control that completely because sometimes I can't control the actions of other people. What do you hope that readers will gain in that kind of sense, like persevering towards the things that we can control, or understanding the difference between the things that we can't control and the things that we can? Michigan seems to like, she keeps going because she wants to play and she wants to make like things better. But how do we really like distinguish like the things that we can control and the things that we can't? Like, what do you hope readers gain from that? I don't know if I made sense. I said that and I was like, what did I just say?
When you figure out the answer to that, please let me know.
Right? Okay. Maybe we just table that question right now.
I think, I think I want to engage a little bit in it because that's a deep question and it's hard.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your deepness, your depth. And we're always bombarded and I have a group of students who I'm going to be seeing in an hour who are seniors in college, and they feel very much like they've been slapped around by the pandemic, right? That they haven't had a fair shake. And yet, without that sort of, being passionate about the thing you love about, applying pressure to the thing that you love about, working hard, they won't, no matter what, they won't get the thing that they desire out of life. That sort of engagement is so important for human beings, caring about something deeply and working on that thing. One of the things that I hope that people get out of this book and other books that I've written is that, paying attention to the things you love and working hard on the things you love, no matter what is happening around you, is the way to lead a good life. Yeah.
I think that was very insightful. Thank you for that. Especially after that question, man. We've talked about perseverance, and I'm going to be the one that pushes back. When do we stop? Is there a stopping point at persevering? You've got 2 teenagers that are really passionate about what they're doing. And I think you brought up the pandemic and we're still trying to make it day to day. Perseverance is great, but is there ever a stopping point? Like where you're just like, this is enough?
Yeah, I think Michigan, she passes that point a couple of times. And I think that was part of my goal too, it's hard to see it when you're in it. It's really hard to see it. She, again, with the things she could control, all she could control was just to keep pushing forward, and to hope that she was eventually going to get out of it. And I think that's, it's hard because you don't want to say, stay in it, go, because
right.
Really bad things can happen. Bad things did happen and bad things can happen. I think it's okay to want to persevere. You have to learn to do it in the right way. And I think that's part of why both of our books are, hopefully so important to our readers, because if you can, see Michigan's way out of it, and if you can, look at that from the outside and experience it through a book before something like this happens in your own life, I think that's important.
Bingo. I agree with that. Use the books as the windows. Jeff?
Yeah, I think, like Carrie said, when you're in it, it's so difficult to see when you've gone too far, or when it's no longer, serving you as a human being anymore to keep pressing forward. And so one of the things that, I think we've done well, I think, as educators during the pandemic, and I see my colleagues doing this more, is asking students to reflect on their experiences, and so they have time to think outside of just the pressure of the moment. And that's this whole book for Isaiah is a reflection on what's happening, and he ultimately makes a decision to step off. And that is a really difficult decision. But because he's doing this reflecting, he can see how having that sort of engagement up until this moment has made him more likely to do okay in the future. So he's able to sort of make sense of what stepping off means.
I think I have a dog barking at snowplows. Sorry. She's very inconsiderate of RosieCon's panel at the moment. My apologies. So let's shift focus a little bit from the books and persevering as writers. Sorry, guys. Tell us a little bit about your journey. So Jeff, you've written multiple books. So I want to ask you tell us a little bit about your how you started as an author, and especially with this book, the journey to get it published.
Yeah. Well, I actually wrote a book for adults. I guess maybe it came out 15 years ago or something like that. And it's like the whole thing was painful. It was hard to write. It was super hard to get published. It took forever. I kind of thought when I'd publish a book that I'd get a really big check, and then it would be like a hip hop video. I'd be like hanging out by a swimming pool with some gold chains.
Like a publisher's clearinghouse. They brought
it would be
it.
Wonderful, right? And you get a check, and then you wait, and maybe more checks won't come. And at the same time, I had been writing comedy. And that was really fast. You would do stuff and go and perform, and you'd get money. And that was, that seemed like a better path for me, because it was, publishing is so hard. And I just got lucky that my kid, my oldest child went through puberty, and when he got hit by that train, he stopped reading. And one morning he had a real weird smell in his armpit, and he was like, "What is this, Dad?" And I'm like, "You went through puberty." And it just cracked me up so much. I thought, well, maybe I'll try to write him a story that he'll read about a kid whose body is changing really fast. And that turned into me writing books for teenagers. A lot of them have problems with their bodies. And it's been, I got on kind of a contract train where I would just put out a book about once a year for many years. And now my kids are old, and they no longer inspire me in the same way. So I think I don't have as many ideas.
Hopefully they're not watching this and hearing you say that about them. Oh my goodness.
They are so old. I know. They inspire me in different ways. They inspire different fears in me. Yeah. So I really do think it was my son's left armpit that turned into kind of a writing career.
That's the dedication on the next book.
That's right.
Carrie, this is your debut. How do you feel?
Really incredibly grateful, honestly. I've gotten to use writing as kind of a second career. I said before that I'd been in sports medicine before before we had a family, and it is a all-consuming, any time of the day, travel, unpredictable kind of a career. And as soon as I had 2 little kids at home, I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to raise these kids. So writing was something I didn't have time for during that period of my life where I was working and out of the house and traveling with teams. And all of a sudden I got to come back to this passion that I'd had as a kid. And not only that, but once I got back to it, there was all this YA thing that wasn't there when I was a kid. And I was like, I just wanted to gorge myself on all of it. And, but I also noticed that there was a big part of the shelf missing for girls in sports. There's not a ton of sports books. There really aren't. And it was like, yeah, I could do that. Not only that, but I could just love it and have fun with it too. And so that's yeah, I got really lucky with it.
So a question from YouTube that connects to this: are you plotters or pantsers? So do you just fly by the seat of your pants hoping that there's inspiration? Or I think of that, I don't know if you watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, that like meme that has like the whiteboard and he's got pins all over it. I don't know, I'll have to send it to you or something. I sound ridiculous, but are you pantsers or plotters?
Well, I always have cards like filled with stuff. And so I write out a lot of ideas on index cards. And they feel like when I write out an outline, I feel really trapped by an outline. And it doesn't work with me. But if I write out things on index cards that I can pin onto a bulletin board, that I can then rebel against and not use them, I don't know. So it feels like I plan, kinda. That's what I would say. I'm not a pantser. I don't sit down without doing any work outside of the document. But I don't do traditional outlining anymore either. I've tried it, and I always just rebel so hard. I've decided it's not useful to me.
It's nice that you found a method that like suits. Like we each have our own like method of organizing.
Yeah.
So Carrie?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. I like cute notebooks. I'm a big fan of them. I have about 4,000 at any given time, and I don't plot necessarily. I make notes about characters and their backstories. And I think about these characters, and then I've got a premise and I let them drive the boat, and I don't know really exactly how that plot's going to go until I see those characters in that situation.
Okay.
Yeah. So pantser, definitely. I consider myself a pantser.
Hey, to each their own. A question actually came for you, Carrie. Could you talk a little bit about your path to publication? Like, how did you find an agent or a publisher? Jeff, I feel like you could also answer this too. But Carrie, how did you tell us your journey to finding an agent?
Yeah, I went traditional querying slush pile. Yeah. Whether lucky or unlucky, like I said, sports is not a big ask. So when I was looking for agents, there was really only a handful of agents that I thought were really going to want a book. And I was querying my first hockey book, which I had mentioned earlier, which was a little bit lighter and more fun, but also, pretty accurate as far as sports go. But so I did a very short round of queries and got picked up by my agent. And then that book went on. So for if you're not terribly familiar with how publishing works, traditional publishing, you sign with an agent, and your agent takes your work out to these publishing houses, to different editors, and that's how you hopefully sell your book and get a book deal. So my first hockey book went on 2 different rounds of submissions to publishers, and did not get picked up. My next book, I tend to be pretty prolific, so I'm always working on something and I always have the next book ready to go. And that was a mogul skiing book, which actually had quite a good concussion plot line in there for one of the characters. That one went out as well and did not get picked up. So like 2 manuscripts sitting back there if anybody wants them. And then Michigan was my 3rd book that my agent subbed for me. And that one got picked up pretty, I think maybe like 3 or 4 months into sub. So that was a pretty quick thing. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And almost, you know what, now that I think about it, exactly 4 years ago, because I remember watching the Pyeongchang Olympics on the background as my agent was going over the contract with me on the phone. So exactly 4 years ago. Yeah.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Jeff, how did you tell us about your journey to publishing?
It was a long time ago. Also did the querying agents thing, but I was really terrible at it. And a lot of them were actual mail queries then. And I wrote a terrible query letter about how, I don't publish very much, but I'd be really fun to go out to lunch with, and, crap like that. And I was just roundly rejected. I think I emailed a couple queries to, like real estate agents eventually. that was so out of luck. But the one lucky thing that happened is I had like an agent's assistant send my letter back to me marked up saying, don't do this. And so I rewrote the query and got an agent in like 3 queries after that. So it wasn't the material, it was really the way I was presenting myself. So if there are any sort of aspiring writers out there, professionalize yourself. It makes a big deal, a big difference. Don't think you're funny.
Have somebody else tell you that you're funny. And
yeah, that's a good idea.
Right. Are either of you working on anything right now? I know we always write, but like, do we have any books coming out anytime soon?
Go ahead, Carrie.
I just finished edits for a short story, which is going to be in a YA sports anthology. It is called Out of Our League. It's edited by Jennifer Icapelli and Dahlia Adler, and it's coming out in 2023. So definitely keep an eye out for that. You get a little taste of my first hockey girl in short story format. So that's what I've just finished working on. And I've also just finished working on homeschooling 2 children for 1.5 years. They're back in traditional schooling, so it is time to dive into all the ideas that have been piling up for 1.5 years now. So
no more snow days.
Yeah, exactly. Please take them.
I guess the paperback of Cracking the Bell comes out this summer, so it's nice to have one thing. I'm working on a book it's actually an adaptation of a book that I had written earlier, and I'm doing it for YA, moving it from an adult thing down to YA, and I'm working directly with an editor on that. So there's no pub date or anything out there, but feels good, feels right. I think it's gonna happen if I can get through it.
And then a question I always love to kind of wrap things up with: what are you currently reading?
Yeah. Well, I teach college, and so I just read a chapter from Charles Baxter on talking forks and not putting too much pressure, spiritual pressure, on the objects in your fiction.
Oh,
That's the chapter I just finished before this started.
well, so talk to like, do you mind talking about that a little bit? Like, what does he mean by like putting
Well,
like
yeah, this is like I had a student actually this morning. We were talking through her manuscript, and she was talking about a car and how her car had unsuspecting tires. Um, they were about to be popped, but what do you mean by an unsuspecting tire? It's an object. Are you actually, do you want to talk about how your character is unsuspecting and sort of move that emotion through the machinery of your car? And so we decided that unsuspecting tire was not appropriate, and so she started rewriting. She's a really like high level writer, so this was a great conversation to have, rewriting that to have to show the character's emotion more clearly through the objects around her.
Okay. Unsuspecting tire.
It's an unsuspecting tire. It's like, no, it's not.
Like the next
it's a tire. Yeah.
That's like a what were the, like a serial mystery episode name.
That's cool. Yeah. I'll let her know. Yeah.
Right up there with Inspiring Armpit. Right. Yeah. Right there. There you go. So, Carrie, what are you reading right now?
What I'm reading, I have on my nightside table a couple of books right now. One that I've just finished and I need to give back to the library, but sometimes like when they're really good, it's really hard to give them back. So and that one is Margo Mertz Takes It Down. It's another YA book. It is fantastic. Anybody who likes Michigan will also enjoy Margo Mertz. And the other one that's on my night table, which I've only read 2 stories out of, is newly released Game On, which is also an anthology edited by Laura Silverman. And it's a fun kind of games and sports and things like that. So yeah, lots of fun short stories. So highly recommend both of those.
Okay.
Cool.
I feel like short story anthologies have been like
Huge.
they've been huge. They've been sort of my like saving grace when it comes to book talks and recommending, because sometimes kids they want something short and sweet for the brain breaks. And I think something like that, even just like a chapter or something is nice and helps them. I think it also provides like, I read a whole story and like gold star for you. Good job.
Well, and during this pandemic, it's nice to have something that fully wraps and comes around in a short period of time. It's very satisfying. So I've found a lot of comfort in them recently as well.
And I think, especially with any sort of thematic anthology, like a sports one, if I like a particular sport, like, oh, okay. Like, I think hopefully anybody who's listening to this, if they preferred one of your books because they've read it already, they might be inspired to read the other one because they both deal with teens going through life, which is an important topic to talk about because teenagers are people, come on, like they go through all the same stuff that we do. So one quick check on the chat. That was hard to say. Let's see. Do you miss book tours? Oh, do you guys miss? I know virtual is fun, but poor thing.
Yeah, I miss the school visits. That slowed down so much. That used to be a big part of my life was going into schools, and I miss it for sure.
Yeah.
I don't miss it because I never got to do it because Michigan came out in October, and then it was only a couple months before the world shut down. So I really didn't get to experience any of that. So hopefully eventually.
They're so much fun to host you guys at like school event, because kids get to they get to fangirl over you essentially, which is kind of cool because they love your stories and things like that. So
they're the best. Yep.
Yeah. So thank you so much for writing these books. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. Diane is back. So hello.
Hi there. So that means that we're nearing the end, right? Since I'm back on camera. So everyone, thank you so very much. This was a fantastic panel. Tara, Jeff, and Carrie, thank you again for participating. I greatly appreciate everyone's time and attention. Audience, thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself today. And please do not forget to vote for your favorite of the Rosewater titles, okay? There's 25 titles on that list. Michigan versus the Boys and Cracking the Bell are 2 out of the 25 titles this year. So if you enjoyed this, go out and read the books, and please do log on to rosiebookaward.com and vote for your favorite title. That's ROSIE bookaward.com. Now, today was just one of many author panels that we have going on for RosieCon Book Festival. And so our next one is in 2 weeks on February 17th. And we will feature author Sarah Sadie and her memoir nonfiction book called Americanized, Rebel Without a Green Card. So she'll be talking about being a typical American teenager, but not really having a typical home life with being an undocumented family. So that's going to be again on February 17th. All of the RosieCon panels are free. Register through Zoom, or you can catch it live on YouTube, or after the fact, you can use it in your classrooms or librarians with your patrons. So just sorry, we're at home today instead of at school, so it's a little different. Don't forget about catching up with all of those YouTube panels. So thank you, everyone. I hope you all are staying warm, staying safe, and go out there and shovel that driveway now. Or if you're up in Minnesota with Jeff, bundle up, because he says it's -20 or something ridiculous like that. It's not quite as cold here in Indiana, but it's still pretty darn cold. So have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
For joining us.
Bye-bye.